Thank you for joining us for this week's Leadership Podcast. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to let you know TKN Leadership Summit 2025 is right around the corner. Yes, that's right, we're back again. October 28th through 30th, we'll be back for our summit. This year's Leadership Summit is entitled Wiring, Making It All Come Together. We want to see you here in Calverton, Maryland, so that you and your team can expand your leadership potential and take your organization to the next level. Early bird registration is open right now. Go to our website, www.tknleadership.com, so that you can register for TKN Leadership Summit 2025. Now, let's get into this week's episode of the podcast. God bless you and welcome back to Matthew Watley's TKN Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Darrell Williams. You know, here at the TKN Leadership Podcast, our goal is to give you the information that allows you to take your ministry and your leadership to the next level. As the host, I get to sit down with some of the most amazing leaders, thought leaders, and pastors on the planet, and I just sit here and ask the questions that you would want to know the answer to. And this week is no exception. This week, we are excited to welcome to the podcast the Reverend Dr. William H. Curtis, the senior pastor of the Mount Ararat Baptist Church of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You all know him well. You've heard of him. You know he's a preacher par excellence, former president of the Hampton Ministers Conference. He is a co-founder of the Church Online Technology Company, and he's just a man of God and a great guy. Help me welcome right now to the TKN Leadership Podcast, the Reverend Dr. William H. Curtis. Dr. Curtis, how are you today, sir?
Doing great, man. Thank you.
Man, we are so excited to have you with us today. We know that you have had a great tenure of leadership. You've been at Mount Ararat for 28 years now.
Correct.
28 years now. Tell folk a little bit of the William Curtis story. I mean, most folk know who you are, but tell them a little bit.
So I got to Pittsburgh from York, Pennsylvania.
From York, Pennsylvania. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a son of Walter Thomas. I was born and bred in New Salmons, licensed and ordained there. And then at 22, I went to my first church in York, Shiloh Baptist Church, in a city full of blue-collar workers.
Sure.
And I tell people the best way I could describe it is one Wednesday I'd have Bible study and 100 people would be there. The next Wednesday I'd teach Bible study and 3 people would be there.
Wow.
Because everybody worked in a factory.
Gotcha.
And when shifts changed, so did the population for me as it related to church. Being in York put me on the radar screen in the state of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And I attended a Pennsylvania Baptist State Convention convening in Pittsburgh at Mount Ararat.
Okay.
I met the then pastor, Donald Clay, and we hit it off. I was maybe 25, 26 at the time, and he was a young phenom in the Western Pennsylvania area, and he took a liking to me. Gotcha. And he invited me up to preach several times, and because of the diagnosis of lupus, oh, wow. One summer, I actually went to Mount Ararat and filled his pulpit for the month during my vacation.
Oh, wow.
Which is how I got on Mount Ararat's radar screen. The Lord led Donald Clay to start a church, and 1,500 members from Mount Ararat went with him.
Gotcha.
He left about 400 members at Ararat, and I got a call one day from Deacon George Johnson. And he said, "You are the young fella that used to come here." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "We'd like for you to come up, preach." I did. And then that's when they told me they wanted me to be a candidate. Okay. And I did that for maybe 2 or 3 months. And I was sitting in a banquet with my wife celebrating one of our friends. And I got a call saying I had just been unanimously voted to pastor Mount Ararat. Shocked me. And that was in June. And in July, I was packing my wife and my newborn baby and going up I-76 Turnpike, and it's been 28 years.
So 28 years ago from York to Pittsburgh.
Absolutely.
And you've been there ever since.
Yep.
Now, how old were you about when you went to Mount Ararat?
30.
You were 30 when you went to Mount Ararat. So you come to Mount Ararat, you're a young leader, young man at the time, wife, new child, and while it's not a church split, it was a significantly larger church that is now significantly smaller. And Mount Ararat is, how old is it as
118.
a church? 118. So like many of us who pastor, it's not a church that you founded, but a church that you found.
Right.
And a church that you found after, I'm going to imagine the pastor leaving, starting another church and taking a lot of members, was in some trauma. What were the first things that you did as a pastor and as a leader going into Mount Ararat? Because most pastors are not going to be church founders. We're going to come into churches that have been there.
Right.
So what was the first thing that you did?
So my story is unique in that I remember Dr. Harold Alfonso Carter, who was my D-Min professor, saying to me that God cements your leadership in varied ways. And one of the ways he mentioned back then that I didn't understand until I experienced it was that God can cement your leadership through crisis.
Okay.
So when I got to Ararat, to the point you were making earlier, there were families who were now divided. Sure. Some who went with Pastor Clay to the church he framed and formed, Petra, and some who stayed at Mount Ararat. And it was tense.
Gotcha.
In my first year, I had a real difficult time with some remaining staff.
Okay.
He had trained them, he had licensed them, he had ordained them. And one of the persons who had remained on staff was trying to use reverse psychology to be considered for the church. He stood to say, I don't want to be considered as a candidate, hoping that the members would say, oh, but we want you to. As a result of that, not even knowing me, I walked into defiant resistance.
Gotcha.
And it forced me, at the behest of the leadership, to make some immediate changes. The way they were constituted, all administrative decisions and choices are in the purview of the pastor.
Okay.
All hiring and firing is in the purview of the pastor. So I was forced into some decisions. Managing those decisions helped the leadership and the congregation to know the kind of leader that I was becoming. Compassionate, patient, organized, very transparent. I believe in sharing all the information. So right after having to make some shifts in administration, I automatically scheduled the meeting with the leadership, automatically scheduled the meeting with the church, all in succession, to make sure that that night when I got in my car, everybody was properly and thoroughly informed. And it was that night, I'll never forget, Deacon Vi Johnson, who was one of the vocal leaders of Mount Ararat, both if she liked you and if she didn't. And she stood at the close of the meeting, asked if she could say something. She walked slowly to the mic, and I literally was shaking. And she said, we got us a pastor.
Great.
That day, I became the pastor of Mount Ararat.
So for a new pastor, you would say transparency and clarity.
Absolutely. Organization, transparency, clarity, articulation of vision, consistency, treating people with dignity. I mean, just being nice, and then a good work ethic.
Sure.
Absolutely. And for me, the same three pillars have to always be present. Preaching has to be strong, music has to be superlative, and Bible study has to be consistent.
Let's talk about each of those pillars. You this year were one of the faculty for our Compelling Preaching Conference.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us a little bit about what a pastor needs to know to inspire and lead through the preached word.
So I think it always begins with what James Cone has taught and his disciples have incarnated, and that is that all preaching and theology is contextual.
Okay.
And to the degree that you immerse yourself in the context where you are pastoring, the better pastor and preacher you're going to be.
Say more about immersing yourself in the context, because you're from Baltimore. You were in York, then you moved to Pittsburgh.
Absolutely.
What did you do to become of that place?
Well, I jokingly say to people, I treated every invitation as if I was in my own church.
Gotcha.
So if I was invited to do the invocation and benediction at a banquet in NAACP, I walked around the tables like it was like I was hosting the banquet.
Sure.
And I would hear people literally, as I was walking away, I would hear people say, and who was that? And they go, that's the new pastor at Mount Ararat. And then years later, people would say, I decided that night that I was going to come hear you preach. And then subsequent Sundays after that, I decided I would join. The point is, I think, in an age where many preachers are building partitions to remain distant from a congregation, I think church growth very much mandates that you be among the congregation, not common, but among the congregation, so that you can hear the conversations, you can sense the emotionality, and the people learn to build trust, right? I think when you remain just the once a week superstar that comes in, I think that that partition over time, it turns toxic.
Gotcha.
Because then the congregation begins to make value judgments about character and motives, rather than to be able to, with conviction, say, whatever is circulating or being said among the congregation, I know my pastor.
Gotcha.
And I think those things are vital.
So it allows them to really know you as more than
Absolutely.
just the preacher, but not personally, but as a person.
Absolutely. And when they see you serving, like I really do think that ministry for me is an opportunity for me to represent Christ among the people. And as a part of that, pastoral care becomes so important. The preaching is only one aspect. Pastoral care is critical. And that is, as probably not a good way to, probably not a good time to mention the name, but Rudy Giuliani used to say, you have to be there for entrances and exits.
Yeah.
I honestly believe you have not become a beloved senior pastor until you have blessed enough babies, buried enough family members, married enough people who have fallen in love, along with having developed an integrous catalog of preaching, doing the necessary counseling, and extending compassionate pastoral care. Simple things, right?
Yeah.
Building, square footage, creative imaginative programming, all needed. But if those basic things are not there, I don't know that ministry survives.
That core of pastoral ministry that has not changed since the time of Jesus.
Absolutely.
The core of being with the people, among the people, and taking care of
all
the people.
men will know that you're my disciples by the love you have one for another.
Now, I'm going to get to those other two pillars, but you've dug so far into really the pastoral work, I want to dig a little bit deeper.
Okay.
What is the line between being among the people and being, as you put it, common?
Okay, so for me, there always has to be a distinction between the senior pastor and members. So, for example, if I'm at my men's prayer breakfast, I can stand and talk sports and we can laugh and joke, but I'm going to the game with preachers.
Gotcha.
We can talk about golf, which is my addiction, but I'm only playing golf with preachers.
Gotcha.
And when members have often invited me or asked me to go, I will very softly explain to them that there always has to be, for me, the maintaining of the separation between who I am as your pastor versus who I am as just another African American man or just a brother who's hanging around. And I don't ever want to be so common that a member doesn't feel like they need to adjust when they're in my presence.
Gotcha.
If I know I've become too common when language doesn't change and stories that have toxicity don't change, or that people say things to me, refer to me, or interact with me in a way that makes me think they're not really talking to their pastor.
They're just talking to a person.
For me, that's so important, so important.
Let me ask you this. You pastor a multi-generational church. You've got, the women of the church with the hats. You've got the kids, but you've got a lot of college students from the University of Pittsburgh. Full disclosure, my wife was a member of Pastor Curtis's church when she was in undergrad. Younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, crave authenticity.
Right.
How do you still connect with them? Because, you're not an old man, but you're not Gen Alpha, you're not Gen Z. How do you connect with them, remain authentic, and still keep that, let them know they're loved, but still keep that distance of respect?
It's the end part of what you said that I think is the nexus of it.
Okay.
My young people know I have a genuine, deep, abiding care and concern for them.
Okay.
I have tried in earlier years developing a lexicon that matched young adult language. I've tried in earlier years dressing in a way that I thought would appeal. And my young adults actually educated me. They said, we don't come here for that. We want our language challenged, our vocabulary lifted. We expect you to dress the way you dress. It's why we're here. It is, for them, it is a safe place to understand alternative community, right? And to the degree that they know I am leaking authenticity, authenticity becomes my authority.
So authenticity is not about connecting to where they are as much as it is about being authentically who you are.
And it invites people into a higher sphere of theological thinking. Like for me, one of the funniest things is to hear my young adults using my language
Sure.
to rip on each other.
Gotcha.
You know, and or they have roasting moments when I'm doing my young adult Bible study, and they'd be like, you know, Pash, you was in your fields this weekend. And somebody will say, yeah, we learned a new word this weekend. You know, I enjoy that. I enjoy raising people up to a level of kingdom consciousness rather than trying to be consumer attractive, where that attraction might erode my authority, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. We've seen it. I mean, the advent of social media has probably been the worst thing in the world for the church, because you can see people who have gathered big crowds by being just like everybody.
Right.
Sort of I like him because he's just like me. But where's the elevation of that? How do you grow folk if you're all the same?
And I think there has to be a mystique. I think when a preacher walks in the room, I think people should know that spirituality of a different nature has just come among us.
Sure.
And I'm a big stickler for that, and in terms of how you dress, and in terms of how you interact with people, in terms of how you move in spaces. I think the preacher has to protect a mystique, and when he or she becomes so common that that mystique is eroded, I think ultimately it hurts people's perception of holiness.
Gotcha.
Which is, I think, of course, is critical for us.
Gotcha. Second pillar you said was music. You've been at your church almost 3 decades. Music has changed a lot, especially secular music and church music. How do you manage those shifts in a multi-general congregation? Because I know you've got members that are like, if it ain't Mississippi Mass, I don't want to hear it. And you certainly have members who are Maverick City folk. How do you manage that so that you're creating an environment that's welcoming to all, but doesn't repel?
I think you steward a pedagogy that raises a congregation to appreciate that my diet is important to me, and the person who's 30 years younger than me, their diet is important to me too. And that's the critical piece.
Gotcha.
So we maintain the hymns, the Maverick City, the Negro spirituals, the anthems, the choral music, the praise team music, teaching an environment, a congregation, to appreciate the diversity of music presentation that is important for the varied generations that are in there, and then making it fun. Teaching young people to appreciate old church music.
Sure.
And I'll do little things like, oh, this was the song we used to come in from the back of the church on, and everybody stepped as they were coming in. And then I'll have a day where I'll have young adults back there with the arm behind their back like the old ushers used to do. Feeling what old church felt like,
sure,
and making it celebratory. I think to the degree that we don't create a battlefield for the defense of things that are important only to me, and as opposed to that, creating an environment that is fun for me to be as interested in you as I'm trying to be interesting to you. And if you can create that environment, I think nothing is greater than to have a child and a senior in worship next to each other and watching them interact in worship with the full genre of church music.
Oh, that's awesome, because we've seen a lot of churches that have, I'm old enough to be where we didn't have children's church. Everybody sat in the same room.
Right.
And as we built more age appropriate things, I think we kind of we put our young people in a different environment for 10, 12 years and then said, okay, now come in here.
Go back to the main church.
And they don't, it's not the same thing. So it gave rise to churches that feel like youth church because that's what youth knew and were accustomed to. So interested in them, but still interesting to them.
And we tried that. We more recently, just before COVID,
Yeah.
we did away with the whole children's church model.
Okay.
We have it, but it's number one, it's not every weekend.
Okay.
And two, it was critically important to me, particularly because my daughter was 3-4 months old when we got to Pittsburgh.
Sure.
So she's been raised in Mount Era. She's 28 years old now. So she grew in the age of children's church, and I can remember the difficulty of her trying to integrate into the adult church climate and feeling like a foreigner.
Sure.
And watching her navigate that, we went back and we did some introspective musings and decided there has to be an integration along the way. So children sing in the main sanctuary, they participate in worship in the main sanctuary, youth, young adults, all of them do that. But they do have their distinct time on 1 or 2 weekends a month where they can sit around and do the chat,
Gotcha.
that kind of thing. Watch a film and do the investigatory work biblically on a film they were watching. And that's a way of critiquing the culture and all those kind of things that you do to make it germane to their generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you manage musicians? I know a lot of pastors are challenged with managing their ministers of music, their choir directors, just sort of how do you make that an integrated model?
That's a great question. I'm asked it all the time because of the relationship people around the country know I have, both with our minister of music and our minister of worship. And the very first thing that I will say to people is, I pastor them.
Gotcha.
They are not just hired subcontracts.
They're not hired guns.
I pastor them. And I require that every person who is a part of our musical staff is also a part of our church. You got to be a member.
Okay.
Now, you may gig somewhere else. You may play for us at the early service and gig somewhere else after, but you're a member of Mount Ararat.
But your primary church membership is Mount Ararat.
And you will participate in ministry.
Let me ask you this. Has that challenged you with being able to recruit talented musicians? Has there been?
No, because quality attracts quality.
Gotcha.
So my very first hire after going through some transition was a guy who currently serves as Minister of Music, Dwayne Fulton. He's been with me 22 years.
Okay.
And from day one, we both agreed that as we age, we're going to have to, bring in new gift and new talent. And he has been superlative in surrounding and resourcing our music department with talent of varied generations. But he also has helped me to create the environment that I just spoke of. And that is, when he's talking to somebody, he will tell them, if you come to us, you're a member of Mount Ararat. Dr. Curtis is your pastor. Now, so I want to know your family dynamics. I want to hear about crisis. I want to feed into your dreams. One of the meetings that I always have with any new hire is, what is your ultimate dream? I'm living mine. If this is supplemental to your dream, how can I help you to fulfill your dream? I had a CFO who really wanted to be a family therapist. And when she told me that, I'm like, okay, function in your CFO role, but I will pay for your education for family therapy. And I already know I'm working her out of a position I need,
right,
but I'm feeding into her dream. Why am I doing that? Because if she sits here 5 years from now, not having fulfilled her dream or chased her dream, she'll resent me, she'll resent the church, and could possibly resent God. I'm living my dream. Everybody else in that environment, if Mount Ararat is not their dream, it is my pastoral responsibility to help feed their dreams.
So there's something that you're saying that I want to say directly because I want everybody in the audience to hear. You, for your staff, be it musical, CFO, and I'm going to assume because I know you, going all the way down to the janitor.
Absolutely.
You pastor them and see them as people, not units of production.
Absolutely.
And too often in the church, we can get people's gift and not get the person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the biggest travesty to church is when, particularly in the black church, when the multi-staff model kind of began to mushroom. I think we operated so corporate that we forgot that we're still a community of souls.
Gotcha.
Right? I should never overhear a person who is on our payroll navigating a difficult season that I don't know about.
Gotcha.
I should never make myself inaccessible to a person who's also on our payroll because I only see them as a utilitarian figure. I can't operate like that. And plus, it's just my nature is relational.
Gotcha.
Because when we're in worship, I don't want to have to say or sign. I can look at Trini, and he will know
Exactly what
a shift, or to continue, or we need something a little higher, or we need something a little heavier, or we're grieving, and he knows, he can sense. Dwayne can sense, musicians can sense, and and that's because of the framing of relationships. And what we were talking about earlier, I maintain the distinction between pastor and brother.
Gotcha.
I'm gonna always be the pastor, and even if we're sitting around talking about the Steelers game from last weekend, there is a line of demarcation that they cannot cross if they're even challenging and fussing with me about what my commentary is versus what their opinion is.
There's still a...
Absolutely respect that. My pastor, Bishop Thomas, I met when I was 15 years old. We have served, of course, at different times in leadership of different organizations around the country. He was president of Hampton, I served as president of Hampton. If he walked in this room today, I am a son. Now, he can call me in the years when I was president of Hampton, he could call me and I'm talking to him as a president. But if he walked in this room, I'm a son.
Gotcha.
And I will never see that relationship in any other way, no matter where God takes me, no matter what positions I will ever have, he will always be father in ministry.
Gotcha. Your last pillar was Bible study, which I would venture to say has become a forgotten ritual in the church in so many ways, because we come for celebration, we come for shout, but the deepening of ourselves comes through that study. Talk to us about the importance of Bible study and how you've made it matter for Mount Airy.
I think John Jenkins was probably the most influential person in my life when it came to maintaining that basic pastoral responsibility. He said to me when I was contemplating a small groups model, which we did do, and we still have, he said, Bill, any change, growth, mutation, gradation in your congregation will only be managed as well as them having heard your voice. I had invited him to come do a stewardship seminar, and he says, no, you do it. All I'll be is a resource. They want to know what you expect of them. I think the same thing theologically. I think the stronger the church, I think the strength of a church is predicated upon how dutiful the pastor has been about transferring his or her theological reservoir to that congregation. And making sure that the congregation benefits from the wellspring of exposure that the pastor has had. If you leave that only to the facilitation of members who become peers, like in a small group model, I'm not saying there can't be growth, but for a person who has given his life to theological education and the reading of fresh material and all that, my church only becomes as mature as I'm willing to vest in them of what I'm doing to maintain my own sharpness, right? Not to mention the fact that you can solve a lot of potential church problems by making sure that there's a steady diet of doctrinal and theological teaching.
Gotcha.
It helps people to remember what the primary focus of church is. And they gave themselves to prayer and the study of the word. Come on, I mean, it doesn't get any more simple, and it doesn't get any more profound.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We're coming up on our time. I want you to do me one favor. For the leader, be they a young pastor, church leader who's been pastoring for a while, somebody who's trying to grow their church, what would you say is the key leadership principle that has sustained you for almost 3 decades at Mount Ararat? Because you've been through good times and bad times, highs and lows like everybody else. What's been the thing that sustained you? Because I want to be able to have our listeners get through some tough times. So what would that piece of advice that you would give
I've
me?
never let being a preacher become more important than being a Christian. Every single day, what is paramount for me is my devotional relationship with the Lord. And to the degree that that stays front and center, ministry follows a close second. But to make ministry primary and my devotional life and my Christian walk secondary makes me nothing more than a religious professional person. And I don't want to be a religious professional person. And I see what I would call professional prophets, and you can tell the difference, as opposed to seeing people like a Gardner Taylor who, at the end of his career in his 90s, has the capacity to say, I know that I can retire because I've said everything about how much I love Jesus that there is to say. Wow. Considered the dean of black preachers, and at the end, your summation is almost the same as Paul's, right? I fought a good fight. I kept the faith. I finished my course. No mention of churches founded, no mention of mentees inspired, no mention of debates with, kings. And it was all about his integrity to the faith, right? I just think every preacher needs to make who they are as a professional prophet second to who they are as a disciple of Jesus Christ.
This has been William Houston Curtis, the senior pastor of the Mount Ararat Baptist Church of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Dr. Curtis, thank you so much, sir.
Pleasure.
We greatly appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Listen, we know here at the TKN Leadership Podcast that our goal is to get your leadership to the next level. Remember, beyond anything else, you are a leader, but you are a Christian, and keep that first with you. So wherever you are in leadership, keep going, keep growing, and we'll see you here next time on Matthew Watley's TKN Leadership Podcast.